Hi, and welcome to episode 312 of Hot Media with Bob Mann. And this is, I know we're in season three, but seasons and years don't exactly line up. And this week marks the second anniversary of this particular podcast. It's amazing. It started as a sabbatical project, and we've done quite a few episodes and into three seasons. Seasons end with the summer or we take a hiatus, but it's been great. We want to keep doing it. And we wouldn't be able to do it without the help of one of my favorite guests who goes back to the days of my Sirius XM show, Dr. Paul Levinson, professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University in New York City. And on this particular episode, we're doing a 2021 media year in review. And just seconds before I went on, Paul, you and I were talking, doing a little pre-interview prep, and we said, well, do we want to talk about some movies or TV shows? And you said, as much as you love entertainment, we really have to look at the media through the news lens when we look at 2021. It's really been a year where news and news coverage really dominates the picture.
Yeah, and that's not to gainsay the great media presentations like the Foundation series, Isaac Asimov's classic trilogy coming on to Apple TV Plus. There have been fabulous uh, things to watch in the media of entertainment, but fortunately and unfortunately, the big story, I think, is the news coverage. Now, I say fortunately and unfortunately because, first of all, the news has not been good this past year. We started out in the worst possible way, an assault on the capital of the United States, a denial of the result of a democratic election with a small d, and a democratic victory with a capital D. And that going on at the same time as the COVID pandemic has been raging. It's been going up and down and up and down. And there's been a lot of progress in terms of vaccines, but it's still here with us. All of that is the bad news. But the good news is that there have been really a superb series of operations in the traditional media, and in particular cable television, I would say, which has brought us the news. We're talking right now, the day after Brian Williams left his post at MSNBC. He's been at NBC for, God knows, like 40 years already. I read somewhere a quarter of the time that NBC itself has been in existence as a television network, Brian Williams has been there in one way or another. And my wife and I watched his show, The 11th Hour, every night. And there have been other superb shows as well. But that show really summed up what went on every day. In that sense, it was an old fashioned newscast. It was enlivened by Brian Williams' wonderful sense of humor and the guests that he had. But that was the way we have been able to stay in touch with this world, which, apropos of the Foundation series, every day it reminds me of a science fiction novel, and not a very good novel at that. But
Yeah, it is pretty dystopian. We're living in a dystopian future already, except it's the present, and that's what's so scary. It really is.
yeah, and the media are our absolutely essential bulwark in defense of freedom and standing up to the tide of fascism and the dissolution of things that we have taken for granted for years. I mean, if you think about just one of the many things that's going on, the Republican strategy of in state legislatures deciding, and they're planning right now, and they're talking about it, they are not going to certify the democratic results of the next election for president. They're going to basically say, no, we're not sending, if the Democrats win in the state of Kansas, we're not sending those delegates to the Electoral College so they can vote for the person whom the people elected. No, we're going to decide what's best. We're going to put that aside, and send Republican electors. And this is actually a flaw in the Constitution. I mean, what else is new? There are many flaws in the Constitution, but the Republicans have been very good in recent times in mining these flaws to their own benefit. That in itself is one of the most serious threats to democracy. Because if you can't have people electing someone, you count their votes and they're elected, we don't have a democracy anymore.
I was always bothered by the Electoral College, but who'd ever think it would be so corrupted? Well, one of the things, though, that you and I discussed before we started recording this episode is that we can give grades to the news media. We can praise the news media for being what it's supposed to be, the watchdog for the American public. But when people aren't turning to the mainstream media any longer and only to social media, what difference does it really make? It really seems to be, and I'd like you to share with the audience your story about your students because I have a similar experience. The idea that most of the people we talk to between the ages of 18 and 22 don't watch the news, they're getting it from Facebook.
No, absolutely. You know, it used to be I always at the end usually of every one of my classes ask the students, well, where do you get your news from primarily? And you know, it's been decades since newspapers ever got any hands raised. And for a long time, it was, well, the big change was no, people are not getting it anymore from network TV. It's cable TV, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. But I've been noticing for the past few years that now it is no TV at all. And in fact, I just did this little impromptu survey yesterday. Not a single student. I taught two classes yesterday. They were my final classes for the term. Not a single student in either class says they got their news from newspapers, of course not. Not from traditional network TV, not from cable TV either. And right, where do they get their news? Facebook, Twitter, which in itself is not the worst thing, but as actually you pointed out in the conversation we had before we began to record this for the world at large, it's a very, very important point. When you are reading something on Facebook, is it almost always comes with a link that you can click. And as we know, Facebook feels they, and they don't just feel this way, they do make more money when they can get material to people who are interested in and love that material. So if you are a crackpot, if you are a mentally disturbed person who believes that vaccines are killing people, and you want the gratification, you want the reinforcement of other people saying the same thing. If someone writes an article about that, not fact checked, just complete nonsense, you know, something that sounds like it comes out of a bad science fiction novel, you would not only get that article to read on Facebook, but it would come replete with links where you can go off Facebook really into the depths of insanity and read other articles like that. And the same is true with Twitter and most of the social media sites. So, you know, you and I have talked about this many times. It's very tempting to say we have to have some kind of government control on these media. And as you know, my concern with that is, well, that unfortunately could go in the other direction because government control of media is the pathway to fascism. And we don't want that to happen either. So we're really caught between a rock and a hard place here.
It's been a number of weeks since you've been here, and we did talk about we're doing a year in review of media right here on Hot Media. And what the situation we talked about was the Facebook whistleblower. I've seen now her picture on the cover of Time magazine, although that's very old media. And that used to be the ultimate. My picture was on the cover of Time magazine. Now it's like, what's Time magazine? But the thing is that it's been some time now. Do you see any progress in terms of Facebook's self regulation or self improvement?
Sadly, not much. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that irritates me, Facebook is spending a lot of money on ads. which tell us what a good job they're doing. And there's one ad in particular, it shows like a thoughtful guy who he says, I work for Facebook, and he's constantly thinking about what impact the material on Facebook has on the many people who read this material on Facebook. And it's supposed to give us the nice, rosy, comforting impression that Facebook is looking out for us and trying to do the right thing. Well, maybe they're trying to do the right thing, but they're not doing a very good job in that attempt to do the right thing. Because as long as these and I always point out to my students, this is not misinformation. This is not an accident or a mistake. This is disinformation, a deliberate attempt to deceive. Not that Facebook is trying deliberately to deceive, but Facebook loves getting its big bucks for ads that attract a lot of readers. And if in those ads there is disinformation, outright fabrications, be it about politics or the pandemic, and often they're mixed together, Facebook goes with it. And all that I can say is I think Facebook is living on borrowed time, because it is just a matter of time until even someone like me says, you know what, we have to do something and regulate Facebook. And I would hate to see that happen.
Let's just clarify something here. I think a lot of people interchange the words misinformation and disinformation. I'd like you to elaborate on that just a little bit, because I think that people confuse the two or think they're totally synonymous.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's actually easy just in terms of the spelling and the pronunciation to get the important difference. Misinformation is mistaken information. Disinformation is a deliberate attempt to deceive. And it's the difference between, everybody makes errors. To err is human. There's no doubt about it. Nobody's perfect. Even we professors, we make mistakes. Everybody, I know it's hard to
How
believe.
dare you?
Oh, I'm sorry. But the fact is, that is not what the problem is here. The problem is not honest mistakes. The problem is people and organizations who deliberately spread information that's false. Now, there is actually an exception to that, which is just as bad, and that's the genuinely insane person who, let's say, believes that Bill Gates has put microchips into the vaccine, and that's why he or she is not going to get vaccinated. When that person spreads that information, it is still disinformation, but that person might be too far gone to know it. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, let's talk a little bit about vaccines and vaccinations, because they're a good example of this problem. The facts are that vaccines help. That's the science. There's no doubt about it. So there's nothing wrong with people saying, I don't want to take a vaccine for this and that reason, and you can talk to these people. But people who wrap themselves in these disinformation lies, sometimes you can't reach them. And it's surprisingly widespread. There's an old saying, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's attributed to John Stuart Mill. I'm not sure if he was the first person to say it. The gist of the saying is, hey, I believe in freedom. You can swing your arm wherever, however you want, as long as it doesn't hit somebody else's nose, because then you're interfering with that person's freedom to not have a bloody or a broken nose. And that's exactly, I think, what the situation is with the vaccines. You don't want something injected into your body. I get it. Nobody likes it anyway. You might even feel more strongly about it. Fine. But you're not taking a vaccine makes you vulnerable to this potentially deadly virus that not only affects you, but affects the community in which you live and work.
How many people are you infecting? It's not just about you. Let's just talk a little bit about the very far right wing networks, OAN and Newsmax. If social media is the dominant form, and I agree with you that it is at this point, does that make Newsmax and One American News Network less powerful, since they're technically mainstream media? They're a cable news operation, or are they part of a toxic cocktail?
Well, they're certainly part of the toxic cocktail. That's a good word for it. But I don't think that they are the essential part of it. I do think it's social media. That's where the action is, and it has to do with simply the numbers of people, the ages of the people. You're talking about not only kids, you're talking about people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And, the older you get, when you get to our age, and of course, we're eternally young, yeah, for us, we do tend to maybe watch cable more than, be on Twitter and Facebook. Uh, but let's face it, we're in the minority to some extent. And so, because of that, one good thing about that is, yeah, these far right, toxic, paranoid networks are less significant than they would have been 10 or 20 years ago.
And of course, it puts Fox in an odd situation. They have always been the voice of conservative media, but while some of their talk show hosts like Tucker Carlson will go way out on the limb, for the most part, they're not saying that Trump had the election stolen from him, or that, vaccines are going to be poison, or that Nancy Pelosi is drinking the blood of children. It puts them in kind of an odd spot because they lose some ratings and financial edge by not being extreme. It's kind of being punished for not going all the way.
Yeah, it's being punished for having a shred of decency. It's being punished for being at least a little reasonable. Look, Fox is no bargain as far as presenting truthful news. And on this misinformation, disinformation, there's no misinformation on Fox. There is plenty of disinformation. Look, Tucker Carlson is their most watched show in the evening, and they allow him to continue, in his smooth, good-looking way to present, the news. But it's filled with lies. So I wouldn't let Fox. I certainly wouldn't let them completely off the hook simply because they're not a 24-hour insane madhouse of news. But
Right. Tucker alone could be more powerful in terms of spreading disinformation than anybody else, actually, with that country club suave that he brings to it.
yeah, he's an interesting character. He was on MSNBC for a while, where he was much more toned down. Otherwise, he
Joe and
wouldn't
why?
have. Yeah, yeah, and I don't know why he left. I guess MSNBC couldn't take even the smidgen of conservatism that he has. And I just want to make clear, though, I think there is, and I guess conservatives would say, "Hey, well, it's nice of Levinson and Mann to acknowledge this," but I do think we need to acknowledge there is with a small d, Democratic, Republican, conservative point of view. I might disagree with that. And today is also the day that Bob Dole is being put to rest. And I can't help thinking he supported Trump twice. Both elections. He finally broke with Trump when Trump said that Trump had won the election. But it is true that Bob Dole represents a kind of Republican approach to politics and to issues that is sadly almost no longer here. It's an expression of conservative opinions. They want to keep government spending down. They don't want to spend so much on social welfare. They'd rather money be devoted to the military and to build bridges than helping people eat with food stamps. I mean, these are serious issues. And, I think that there should be uh, with a capital D, democratic, staunch opposition to those issues. But at least they're issues that are based in truthful disagreements, different opinions about what the best thing is to do.
And never willing to tear down the government, destroy the democracy, rip apart the Constitution. There was the Republican Party of Bob Dole. There was the Republican Party of John McCain, of Ronald Reagan. This is not Trump. This is not Tucker. This is not what we've been dealing with. This is a very different, there have been conservatives for years, and there are many things, the Democrats aren't right all the way down the line. That's for sure. And these were debates among Americans. Now it's the idea of everything un-American is equated with patriotism. It's the ultimate oxymoron. It really is.
Yeah, and the Democrats have a lot to learn. I mean, it's easy for us, we're not in politics, to sit back here and critique from the sidelines. But, I think that Biden and the Democrats have done, a great job in terms of standing up to what we're talking about, but not as good a job as they could in terms of getting their own people on board. Someone like Manchin of North Carolina, he's not evil incarnate. He's elected to the U.S. Senate on the capital D Democratic ticket in a state in which, I don't know, over 70% of the vote went to Trump in the last election. And somehow Manchin manages to get elected. That's why we even have 50, we the Democrats have 50 seats in the Senate. So rather than constantly attacking him, figure out a way to work with him, which I think to some extent Biden and the more enlightened Democrats have been able to do. But we don't have the luxury of fighting one of our own people simply because that person comes from a conservative state and therefore is on that fringe part of the Democratic Party. This is part of the larger problem of anytime anyone disagrees with us about anything, we're all set to scream and yell and worse and denounce that person. That's not the way to get things done.
I can't let you go without two more questions, if you would. Number one, with the news media, what do you think was the news media's greatest shining moment of 2021? And the second is, we have to talk about one thing in entertainment. Just can you give me the brightest thing that you think in all of entertainment media came from 2021?
Okay, as far as news coverage and media, I can't. So many things have happened. The coverage of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that's a major thing. The continuing coverage with medical experts of COVID, that's another major thing. So I'm going to say, as far as news is concerned, it's been all year, just about every day, every minute. So.
But I mean, their greatest shining moment, their
Oh,
greatest accomplishment.
well, their greatest accomplishment has been staying afloat and reporting all that news. I mean, I guess if I had to pick one thing, it would be the coverage of January 6th, being there pretty much as soon as it happened, covering it minute by minute. And as it turned out, nobody realized that this was the worst attack on the Capitol, since I guess the War of 1812, when the British burned the Capitol. So I would give that moment, but I don't like even saying what the best moment is because it's been happening every day. The news media have never been more essential than they are now. But I won't give that kind of cop out answer if you think that is an evasion of the answer for your second question, because
Yeah, no, I know
yeah,
you probably have
yeah,
a definite on this part.
yeah. It is easily and far and away the foundation series on Apple TV Plus. Not that it is a flawless series. I have problems with it. Other people have problems with it. But this is something now on television that is the realization of, since the trilogy was first published in the early 1950s, something that fans of that trilogy have been yearning for. And I think that this television series did an excellent job. I do, however, have to give you a very close runner up. I mean, it almost tied. See, I can never just give a straightforward answer. That would be Peter Jackson's three-part documentary on the Beatles, which was just extraordinary. I mean, it changed my life watching it. I felt like a missing piece of my life had now finally fallen into place because I love the Beatles and I never understood completely why they broke up. I still don't understand completely, but this documentary was just sensational. I can tell you my favorite moment in the documentary. It's when
I'll take it.
the British Bobbies come up, they bulldoze their way onto the roof where the Beatles are performing, Paul McCartney is playing. They're singing "Don't Let Me Down," and they realize that there's somebody on the roof. McCartney turns around, looks at the cops, comes back, goes "woo," and then like starts smiling and does a little dance. McCartney is thrilled that the cops are on the roof. Good for McCartney.
Well, Paul, I knew that you would have that. That's in episode 3 of
Yes.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
Just if people can't do 6 hours or
Right.
9 hours or whatever. Thank you so much. I thank you for all the years that you've come on here, and you gave us again great perspective to wrap up the year. And I certainly hope that you join us frequently again in 2022.
Anytime, Bob.
All
You
right.
have a wonderful holiday.
Paul, hang with me and just until I do the sign off, okay? And I'll talk to you as soon as we stop recording. That's it for this episode of Hot Media with Bob Mann. Next week, we bring back one of our other regulars, Dan Casino. His book has been published on masculinity and politics, so please be watching and listening for that. One of the things I want to stress is that you can find out everything about this podcast by going to the website, www.bobmanhotmedia.com. This is still primarily an audio podcast, but it also has video on YouTube. We hope you watch and subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter, my handle right there at Bobman Media. I thank you very much for watching on a regular basis here and for listening. And we ask you to subscribe and join us on a regular basis as we talk about the hottest content and hottest controversies in mass media right here on Hot Media.